And we're live. Good morning, comic book fans. Welcome back to Comics in 5 Minutes. I'm Evan Shorty, and I've got a bit of a cold. I do apologise. I'm a little bit off today. I'm going to be sniffing and snivelly. I do apologise. But I'm going to try to at least review Unknown Kadath. What I'm going to start by talking about is that word at the top there, Lovecraft, because this is an adaptation. And I've recently done a review of an adaptation, which is basically turning Star Trek Lower Decks into a comic book. And quite enjoyed going from a screen to a page. I think it gives you more options. Going the other way from like prose to a comic book, I think can be a little bit limiting, especially when you consider Lovecraft's very prose-heavy style. It is verbose and full of words which are actually kind of hard to picture, and he doesn't really make any pretense that you're supposed to imagine these. He constantly talks about unimaginable things. I think it's hard to then put that onto a page where you're supposed to have a drawing of it and see it. Thankfully, the creators of this comic book, give me a second, I have to check their names, Florentino Flores, writing it with artist Guillermo Sana and Jacques Salomon, have basically not so much ignored that idea or that concept. That'd be a silly thing to do, but they have kind of tempered it a little bit. And instead of trying to fully realize the worlds that Lovecraft creates, instead they are telling an adventure story set within those worlds and concentrating on far more of a human story. And this works for Randall Carter, who does go on the Dream Quest to Unknown Kadath, which is a Lovecraft story which I have vague memories of reading. A long time ago, I think. I remember the Cats of Ulthar and very little else. I'm trying to even remember like that much about Randall Carter, because he seems to be very aware of the world around him, and that includes the other world and other worlds or that Lovecraft created, part of his mythos. But the fact that he seems to know what's going on, instead of it being this great unknown thing, it centers it and gives you, the reader, a much easier way to get into what's going on. He will literally tell you that there is the Sultan god or goddess, whatever, Azathoth, which is an absolutely huge, terrifying monstrosity, and that they are the other gods and the outer gods and the elder gods, who are all terrible beings. And instead of just kind of being like, they are things that man is not meant to ken, instead, it kind of lays out that these are just terrifying things. Maybe their unknowingness is what makes them terrifying, but instead of worrying about that kind of thought experiment, instead, we just get told that these are monsters, they are terrifying, and you don't want to see them because they are terrifying. And weirdly, it works for me. I think instead of trying to recapture what made Lovecraft such an influential writer, you can just play in his world. I think the last Alan Moore thing, where he, like the massive 12-issue Providence thing, was a really good way of doing that. You had a lot of things from Lovecraft's world, but you very rarely had to get far into the idea that what we're not seeing is the terrifying thing. They did actually have stuff on page where it was weird and crazy and disturbing and unusual. They do the same in this. They have like the Zug. I'm trying to remember the names of them now. Sorry, again, my head's a bit fuzzy. I'm on some medication for a cold. And without really knowing much about them from what I remember of the book, they still came across as kind of right for the story. There's no way I know they were wrong for it. And in an interview, one of the artists or creators was saying that this is a story which isn't very well known. And yeah, I've read the story and I think it's quite an unknown story. So it does give them a bit of freedom to tell the story their way and design the characters and the creatures their way as well. There's nothing I read from this which really kind of dragged me out of it. In fact, there was an absolutely genuinely wonderful bit of kind of otherworldly horror, which is a ship going over a waterfall and the view from behind a guy hanging onto the main mast as he falls into an abyss is actually just kind of great. The darkness and the slight colors of the highlights, you don't need to know exactly what's going on. You don't need to be fully aware of each individual creature's physiognomy or what they're made up of, or if they are even light or matter or energy. Instead, you just get this wonderful visual treat of something. But then it carries on and it gets to the plains of Leng and going to the dark side of the moon, and it just plays with the world rather than expecting you to be fully aware of it, and it does such a good job. Actually really enjoyable. I remember reviewing some of the Ablaze stuff when they're doing Conan, and that was fine because I'm just retelling Conan stories, which I'd read fairly recently, and it's nice, but this is a different beast. It's slightly less just pulp action, more contemporary adventure story. And yeah, a couple of thumbs up for me in this one. I enjoyed it more than I thought I would. I always get a bit skeptical doing Lovecraft adaptation stuff for the reasons mentioned already, and the fact that he was a massive racist. But that's it from me today. I'm going to go and try and get myself well, and I'll come back tomorrow with another review. Until then, look after each other, everyone. Stay safe. Bye.